Alright, chapter 15, Darwin's Theory of Evolution. This is one of the more exciting chapters for me. It's some of the stuff that I love the most and most passionate about as a biology teacher. So let's get started. So this is the interest grabber, where essentially you're asked to talk about animals that you've encountered in the past 2 days, and you're asked to talk about making a hypothesis to account for differences between animals that you've seen, finches and tortoises, in from the Galapagos Islands. So here's an outline of 15-1, which I'm not necessarily going to follow, but let's get started with 15-1. So two terms we're going to talk about in this is the theory of scientific theory, and evolution. So first of all, evolution is talking about the diversity of life on Earth, and we're going to talk about evolution, which is change over time, and in this case, where modern organisms have descended from ancient organisms. And we've talked about, you can talk about evolution in other terms too, evolutions of government, evolutions of almost anything where there are technological changes. And it's true also in the natural world, where things evolve, they change over time. So one of the things I said is a scientific theory. We talked about a scientific theory where evolution is considered a scientific theory. Now, a theory as we know it is sort of more of what a scientist calls a hypothesis, which is an educated guess. That's what a layman would term a theory. In science, a scientific theory is something far more tested than a hypothesis. It is essentially a hypothesis that has been tested and supported by evidence, and this theory then can be used to make other predictions, which then the outcomes of those predictions can refine the theory and change it. So we're talking mainly about Charles Darwin, as we saw in the movie I showed in class, and he's the central figure of this chapter, and by far he's the one who contributed the most to understanding evolution. And a large part of Darwin's story is about his trip on the HMS Beagle, which basically went around the world surveying the world. And he stopped in numerous places, and some real significant ones occurred in South America and off the coast of South America and the Galapagos Islands. And as we've shown in the past, you saw a lot of different diversity in organisms, and right there from that picture just of a map of the Galapagos Islands, you can see pelicans, iguanas, penguins, tortoises, all kinds of flowers and beetles. So he was overwhelmed by the fact that he saw so many different types of life. He famously found nearly 100 different beetles in one day in a forest in South America, and he was so impressed that there were so many different types of animals. One of the other things he noticed is that the animals were very suited to their environment that they're in. For instance, these are 4 finches, and the finches, some of them lived in trees, some lived on cactus, but they all seemed to have beaks that were suited to what they were doing. Some were large beaks that would crush, some of them grasped, some of them could use a little tool, some of them are small so they could probe inside to look for insects, but they were all very well suited to the environment they were in. You didn't find a probing beak where there were cactus. You found a different beak that was more adapted to the cactus. He also looked at lots of fossils while I was over there, and the fossil record was just starting to build at this time. And what he wondered why there were fossils of organisms, and why they had disappeared, and why there were other organisms in the present very strikingly similar to it. And this is a glyptodon, and that's an armadillo. Darwin also wondered if these finches that he saw on the different islands had once been from a common ancestor, meaning they were all sort of related in the past, but since they went to different islands, they became different species. And the last point of it was that he noticed that the giant tortoises, once again, how well adapted they were to where they lived. For instance, the saddle-backed tortoise, which was found on Hood Island, was in an area where there was very sparse vegetative growth, and he had issues getting to it. So he had a much longer neck than, say, the dome-shaped shell tortoise, which had a very small neck and didn't really have to worry too much about reaching and trying to get food in hard-to-reach places. So he spent a lot of time wondering about that. Now, this was a very short podcast on a pretty significant section, and I would really encourage you to read the book, because it's hard to show this in bullet points. It really is almost a story of his trip, and I think some of the videos that we've seen in the class have helped you guys a lot to understand this. So I encourage you to try to go to a lot of different sources to get as much information as you can on this.